Ricky Ray is a graduate of Columbia University and Bennington College. He is a disabled poet, critic, essayist, and the founding editor of Rascal, a Journal of Ecology, Literature, and Art. His presentation is titled Identity Earth, an Invocation of the Ecological Self. Welcome, Ricky.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. I've been having a tough time lately. I've been in the hospital 4 times in the last month, and today's the first day I've been able to sit in a chair and enjoy anything. So it's a real pleasure to be here. My essay is using the logic of immanence and transcendence and the tools of the lyric essay to essentially explore the question of self and responsibility between the human, the earth, and the larger cosmos. I'm going to apologize up front that it's going to run a couple minutes long, but I just haven't had the mental energy to make those final cuts. So I'm actually going to share the essay. So if you guys want to read along with me, go for it. Identity Earth, an invocation of the ecological self. I'd like to open the talk today with a quote by the obscure Welsh writer, Margaret Evans, who in her 1943 autobiography wrote, "The earth is the lung by which I breathe. The earth is my greater flesh." In a remarkable self-history that's as much about her landscape as her person, Evans continually develops the sense that she's both a human and an ecological process, or a sense that self is both possessed and shared, that we're people, yes, but we're also the enveloping identities we belong to. And we're responsible to those entities as those entities every bit as much as we're responsible to these fleshly pots of humans. In other words, we are the earth before, during, and after our brief sojourn as human. And our well-being in story is a function of her well-being in story. A miraculous story whose genesis I'd like to bring into focus before invoking our own. The story of the earth, and thus the story of ourselves, began 14 billion years ago, when the universe was a young whippersnapper of pointillism, a nothingness is everything in which all stars and galaxies, all mysteries and eventualities were concentrated in a single dot. Trillions of degrees hot, the dot exploded and flared forth, creating the universe and commencing the grand symphony we call existence. All planets, all lives, all stories and beings began their unthinkably long journey through the womb of becoming and transformation, whose phenomena to this day continue to emerge in an unbroken process of revelation. A process so precise that if the rate of expansion had been 1/1,000,000% slower, the universe would have collapsed. And if it had been 1,000,000% faster, the universe would have exploded too quickly for structures to form. And so we can see that even early on, the universe had an inherent tendency to maintain itself and to propagate through processes of physics, chemistry, and evolution. Let's shift gears now and say that Grandmother Universe is a painter. In one brushstroke, galaxies formed. In another, density waves passed through the Milky Way, igniting our ancestral stars, which blazed, collapsed, and exploded, forming the elements and filling in the periodic table at once. This cycle repeated until one day our sun emerged, and around it, a curious planet, not quite liquid nor solid, neither too hot nor too cold, a rare confluence of circumstances ripe for a particular kind of development. A molten planet, her heavy elements sunk to the center, the lighter elements drifted to the mantle, and the crust, her one solidity, rested atop the continual movements. Earth, then, was fire within, shifting land, flowing waters, breath of wind, sunlight pouring through. The interwoven layers coalescing to comprise the ecospheric whole. Now, let us zoom in on baby Earth, whose first billion years were truly volatile. Radiation, fire, rock, and gas ruled the day. volcanoes spewing carbon to form the atmosphere harboring warmth, and the earth, whose creativity was born of the stars, already busy with her lifelong work of synthesis. From inorganic molecules and her inherent talent for patterning, she conjured the first spark, biology, the single-celled organisms that open the doors. From there, the whole parade of bio-beings streamed through. Cells merged, photosynthesized, respirated, and complex life was on its way. The earth, like the universe, increasing in complexity, proficiency, and depth. In her creatures, she became not only animate, but conscious, sentient, intelligent, developing a level of intimacy and ingenuity that inhabits all hearts and minds and deepens to this day. Her creation she nurtured and nourished, self-regulating her climate over the course of 4 billion years, even though the sun's temperature increased 25% during that time. Perpetually nudging herself and her children onward, she was deeply creative and protective, even when pushed to the point of annihilation, a point that nearly snubbed her precious mode of life at least a handful of times. She always managed to make room enough for life to hold on, to repopulate the canvas. And even if she hadn't, her ability to restore biology from chemistry as an evolutionary brushstroke remained. So, if it isn't apparent yet, let me state it plainly. Humans arose within the earth, are of the earth, will be from embryo to faint impression in the geological record, the very earth herself. We are emergent properties of an ecological entity, a planetary being who's both life-bearing and life-preserving, and more than that, life-living. She lives us every bit as much as we live our lives. No earthly life occurs save in her, though life is but one of the ways in which she moves. Her ecosystems are intricate, holistic dances of organic and inorganic phenomena, the soil, water, and air inviting, eating, drinking, breathing creatures into her existence, creatures who enrich her beyond comprehension. It is by her breath, the air, that we breathe, and by her being that we find ourselves enmeshed in terrestrial suffering and love. Further still, it is in the precise balance of her ecosystems that life flourishes or disappears. The health of the soil and the health of the water and the health of the air are inseparable from one another and inseparable from the health of the creatures who take their nourishment from these matrices. The health of an individual, of a species, of all species, is a function of our ecosystem's abilities to maintain us. It should be clear then that the maintenance of these systems that have taken billions of years to develop and refine, is of the highest order of importance if we place value upon our lives and upon the continuity of life itself. It should be clear too that as we learn of the human body's need for balance through sickness, so we learn of an ecosystem's need for balance through illness, the symptoms of which are biodiversity loss and landscape degradation. If the land is sick, so will be the creatures who drink its milk, and every single living creature drinks the land's milk. So how do we care for an ecosystem? Much like we care for ourselves, by beginning to understand that our identity no more ends at our fingertips than life ends with an organism, and that an ecosystem is a layer of self we share and are. Where the 14 billion year evolutionary journey that gave rise to our parents gave rise to us and will give rise to countless other manifestations and species. And where all of our actions, experiences, and their spheres of influence across all points in time. And where all the roles we play in our daily lives. And where all that can be felt and all that can't and all that gives rise to feeling. Each of us is simultaneously a person, a family, community, species, life, ecosystem, and planetary existence. And the maintenance of every aspect of that identity is a requirement of health, the health of an entity named the Earth, whose being we, not as people, but as a planet and as a majestic nexus of identities are. So caring for the Earth is caring for ourselves, and begins through a process of familiarization and care. We learn that we inhabit the process of life and enjoy the process as its conditions flourish, and suffer the process as its conditions degrade. And we learn the ways in which our thoughts and actions maintain or diminish life's integrity. We're one of nearly 9 million species, amongst countless landforms, rivers, oceans, and other terrestrial inputs, all of which communicate through the language of embodiment and collectively practice symbiosis. As we open ourselves to that worldwide, all-inclusive conversation, our ethical imperative becomes clear. Aldo Leopold defined it thus: a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And yet we find ourselves in a deeply destructive spiral of ecological abuse, if not outright ecocide, that threatens to overwhelm the hopes of even the most stalwart eco-warriors. But if we turn to geology and open the book of rock, we find that destruction and creation go hand in hand in the annals of earthly existence. Volcanoes once spewed toxic gases that nothing could breathe and survive, and spewed oceans of lava that set the world ablaze. And yet over time, they helped establish the carbon cycle that formed the atmosphere and the rhythms of seasons and renewal. Trees, likewise, were once the most destructive beings on the planet. When they arrived as newcomers to the carbon cycle, they sequestered carbon so fast, CO2 dropped by 90%, and the Earth plummeted into a 100 million year ice age. But the slate wasn't wiped clean. And when eventually the carbon began to even out, the Earth warmed, and the trees were still here, supplying creatures with oxygen, shelter, and food. They were still here, reshaping the world. But this time they were the cooperative members of thriving ecosystems, helping the Earth realize the creative potential of forests and all the stories of love, loss, joy, and despair that happen therein. Imagine if we could rise to the task and completely reshape the human endeavor. If we could transform from a predominantly irresponsible, destructive member of the earthly family to a member who lives by the principle of shared health and cares for each aspect of the earth as an aspect of ourselves. Imagine if we could shift from an anthropocentric to ecocentric orientation, revising and revitalizing perception, identity, language, belief, ethics, education, behavior, and law. In the process, improving all of our social, cultural, and economic systems. Imagine if we could shift from me-first individualism to cooperative communion, from human as other to human as earth, from self as person to self as all, from ethics by projection to ethics by inclusion, from human language to the language of coexistence, from human rights and the interest to the rights and interests of the earth and everything and everyone who enjoys their being within her. Furthermore, the call isn't just upon our own abilities and resources. The operative entity facing this future is the earth herself, with billions of years of corrective measures and wisdom at her disposal, even if in the human mind, we're so wrapped up in our individual experiences, we fail to recognize her in ourselves. But let's say we're too late. Let's say we're one of her more destructive modes, and we wipe ourselves and large swaths of life from the slate. Even then, there's far more of the story to tell. Estimates say the Earth has 800 million years of life left. She isn't even halfway through her prime life-bearing years. So just imagine her evolutionary capacities and eventualities yet to be expressed, with or without our continuation in the tale. But what if we could hold on? How amazing would it be if we followed the lead of the trees, if we outgrew our rebellious, destructive youth and helped usher in a new era, a radical expansion of life forms and consciousness fueled not by fossil fuels and self-interest, but by communion and cooperation. How amazing would it be if we were to harmonize with the earth's creativity, if we became symbiotic catalysts in sync with her hand and helped her paint the picture in which there are many creatures like us, a rich spectrum of deeply discerning artistic species, each of us enjoying her health and helping it flourish, each of us enriching her intelligence and experience, each of us deepening her identity and existence, each of us eager to love and uphold every single part of her show. I'm going to stop there. I have a poem, but considering where the time is, I think I can skip that and go to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ricky. This is such a wonderful presentation. I really do appreciate such a beautiful, beautiful words that I would I would hard to imagine to have from and such a full of wonders. So I would like to open up the space. The good news is that we'll be closing our room at 3 o'clock, so we will have more time for Q&A. And if there are also more questions arising, we would like to use that time. But for now, I would like to invite people to have a comment on Ricky's presentation, questions, or reflection.
I would like to say one thing. Since I didn't get a chance to read the poem, I did go, and I thought that might happen. I did go ahead and create a link online for people to download the lecture itself, some slides I put together, and you'll see a link to the poem in there. So if you go to rickyray.co/GCRE, all that material is there for you. So just to let you know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I can start with my own question. I personally don't think myself as an artistic or poetic, and like these works are so amazing. But what would you say that what would be the power of this poems or arts that can impose on people and start this environmental activism or really raise awareness of ecological crisis?
I mean, I think a lot of people have different entry points to some type of ecological awareness. Some people have a gestalt moment in the forest where they're looking at a tree and they're realizing that they're breathing the same air and they share the same air, and they start to communicate with one another. Sometimes it's through an academic lecture in a lecture hall. Sometimes they're reading a poem and they come across something like "The earth is the lung by which I breathe. The earth is my greater flesh," and that really gets them going. So, it's I think one of many entryways into realizing that self isn't limited to our person, to our humanity. It's something that we share across the entirety of being, and we have a responsibility to that self beyond ourselves, beyond our persons, I should say.
I would be really interested to hear how you came up with this writing, and like what were you going through, or was there any inspiration that you've been drawn to while you were writing this piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about this topic for about 10 years, and it's an excerpt from a book that I'm writing on the topic. So while I was at Bennington, I was doing an MFA in poetry. We were also doing some critical writing there, and I was writing a book basically about ecological awareness. So tracing the development of life, from the beginning of the universe to when we emerge, and then tracing the development and degradation of ecological awareness. So, how writing, how religion, even how technology, science, various things let us see ourselves as separate or something other than the earth, and to discount the earth and to use it as a commodity as a resource rather than as a holy body that we're a part of, and trying to take it beyond that to look at the science, because I think the science and the mystical intuition, the philosophical intuition, the religious intuition are at a point where they're merging. Our mystical sense of our communion with the earth, our scientific understanding of how we relate and exist within the earth are really merging at the same point. And so I was looking at how the science merges with all of that, and how it creates this vision of a possible future that we could be part of, but we could not. But, you know, given the Earth's only halfway through her life-bearing years, I think there's much more that she could do that we couldn't even imagine at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. There was one request from the group to stop sharing your screen, Ricky. Would you be okay?
Okay.
And we can just go to the gallery view. We would have like a minute left. Any burning question or comments?
I guess I have a quick one, Ricky. I think a certain strain in religious thought is to definitely place humanity in a superior position within the cosmos. Can you speak of how your art helps to decenter that position?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I don't believe in the superiority of humans over other creatures. I think every single part of the Earth is the star of the show, and it's the working together of all those things, the way that we all come together to create biology out of physics and chemistry that makes it amazing. And I think we're special to ourselves, we're special to each other. It doesn't mean we're not special, it doesn't mean we're not important, but so is everything else, and we need to recognize and focus on that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.